The city exhaled its weary, grimy breath against the polished glass of the silversmith. Inside, the air was different. It tasted of old money and quiet power, scented with leather and aged scotch. Arthur Valentino sat in his usual booth, a throne of dark red leather tucked into the restaurant's deepest corner. From here, he could see every entrance, every exit, every face. He was a man of angles and observation. His empire was not built on chance. It was built on architecture. He was the architect. His suit was charcoal gray, tailored to hide the bulk of his shoulders and the unyielding stillness of a man who had not known true relaxation in 40 years. His hands, large and scarred at the knuckles, rested on the table. One cradled a heavy crystal tumbler. The other lay flat, a silent promise of crushing force. Across from him, a younger man named Julian sweated, his own suit suddenly feeling cheap and ill-fitting. Julian ran the waterfront unions, or rather, he thought he did. In reality, he was a manager, and Arthur was the owner. "The arrangement is simple," Arthur said, his voice a low rumble, like distant thunder. It was not loud, but it filled the space, silencing the clink of silverware and the murmur of other diners. "My cargo moves first. Always." "Of course, Mr. Valentino," Julian stammered, dabbing his brow with a napkin. "But the Federals are sniffing around. They're putting pressure on us. It's getting difficult." Arthur took a slow sip of his scotch. He did not like the word difficult. It was a weak word. An excuse. Problems were not difficult. They were simply problems. And all problems had a solution. "Pressure is a tool, Julian," Arthur said, placing the glass down with a definitive click. "You can use it to crush things. Or you can use it to shape them. Learn to shape things." He was about to elaborate, to explain the finer points of leverage and fear, when a sound from outside tore through the restaurant's curated tranquility. A screech of tires. A sickening crunch of metal on metal. It was loud. "Close." Every head in the restaurant turned toward the front windows. Arthur did not flinch. His eyes, however, narrowed. His two men, stationed discreetly near the entrance, stiffened. One of them, Leo, his right hand for 2 decades, put a hand to his ear, listening to the report from the men outside. Leo was a man carved from the same granite as Arthur, just younger. His loyalty was absolute, his methods efficient. He approached the booth, his face a mask of professional calm. "Sir," Leo said, his voice low. "There's been an accident. Your car." Arthur's car was a custom-built, armored sedan that cost more than the average house. It was a fortress on wheels. An extension of his control. "Who?" Arthur asked. One word. That was all that was needed. "A civilian," Leo replied. "A woman. She ran a stop sign. Hit the rear passenger side." Julian looked relieved that the focus was off him. Arthur gave him a cold glance that wiped the relief from his face immediately. The business was not concluded. It was merely paused. "Handle it," Arthur said to Leo. The command was simple. Leo and the other man would get the woman's information, their lawyers would deal with the insurance, and the incident would be erased. A footnote. Arthur turned his attention back to Julian, ready to resume his lesson on the physics of power. But then something else broke the protocol. A commotion at the door. The restaurant's host was trying to stop someone, his voice a flustered whisper. "You can't go in there. Please, we can handle this outside." A woman burst past him. She was young, maybe late 20s, with frantic eyes and a pale face. Her clothes were simple, worn. A nurse's uniform, slightly wrinkled. She scanned the room, her gaze landing on the only table that commanded such obvious authority. She walked directly toward Arthur. Leo and the other guard moved to intercept her. Instinct. Protection. They placed themselves between her and the table, 2 human walls. "That's far enough," Leo said, his voice quiet but unyielding. The woman flinched but didn't stop. Her eyes were locked on Arthur. They were filled with a terrifying cocktail of fear and desperation. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "I need to talk to him." The owner of the car. "I'm so sorry. I didn't see the sign. I was rushing." Arthur watched the scene unfold. He should have been annoyed. This was an intrusion. A breach of his sanctuary. But he wasn't annoyed. He was curious. Then he saw it. Peeking out from behind the woman's legs. A little girl, no older than 5, with wide, frightened eyes and a tiny hand clutching the fabric of her mother's scrubs. The child wasn't crying. She was just watching. Watching him. Arthur raised a hand. A small, almost imperceptible gesture. But for his men, it was a command as clear as a shout. Leo and the other man stepped aside. They did not understand, but they obeyed. They always obeyed. The path was clear. The young woman took a hesitant step forward, pulling her daughter along with her. She stopped at the edge of the booth, twisting the strap of her worn handbag. I know your men are out there," she began, her words tumbling out in a rush. "And I'll give them my insurance, I will, but I need you to know. It's not very good insurance. And I don't have any money. Not for a car like that. But I can pay. I can make payments. $50 a week. Maybe $75 if I can get more shifts. I'll do anything. I'll clean your house, this whole restaurant, anything. Please, don't call the police. I can't. I can't afford trouble." Arthur said nothing. He just looked at her. He saw the cheap shoes, the frayed collar of her uniform. He saw the raw, red skin on her hands, the hands of someone who scrubbed floors and changed bedpans. He saw the fierce, protective grip she had on her child's hand. And in the little girl's eyes, he saw a reflection of a ghost he had buried long ago. Arthur Valentino was a man who solved problems with finality. And this woman had just created a very big problem. Stay with me until the end, because what happens next isn't just about a car crash, it's about a debt that could only be paid in loyalty. If you're enjoying this story, do me a favor and hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's next. And in the comments below, let me know what city or country you're watching from. I love seeing where you all are. Now, let's get back to it. The silence in the restaurant was now absolute. Every other diner seemed to have vanished, their presence fading into the background of this strange, tense tableau. Julian sat frozen, a forgotten man at a table suddenly transformed into a stage. Arthur leaned forward slightly. "What is your name?" he asked. His voice was still quiet, but the thunder had receded. It was just a low rumble now. "Sarah," she whispered. "Sarah Jensen." He then looked down at the little girl, who was still hiding, still watching. "And who is this?" Sarah gently nudged her daughter forward. "This is Lily." The little girl gave a tiny, shy wave. Arthur's face remained impassive, but something shifted in his eyes. A flicker of memory. A ghost of a different little girl's wave. He had built his world on a foundation of rules. These rules were what separated him from the common thugs and brutish animals that populated the city's underbelly. He was a predator, yes, but a predator with a code. Rule number 1, his word was bond. If he gave it, it was as good as iron. Rule number 2, betrayal was a terminal disease. There was no cure. Rule number 3, and this was the most important one, the one forged in the fires of his own personal hell, women and children were sacrosanct. They were not to be targets. They were not to be used as leverage. They were to be left out of the business. Completely. This woman, Sarah, had not broken any of his rules. She had just entered his car. But in doing so, she had crashed through the carefully constructed walls of his world and landed right in the middle of it, bringing with her the one thing he had long since banished, profound, unguarded vulnerability. He had seen her car when he glanced out the window. It was an old, faded blue sedan, at least 15 years old. The kind of car held together by hope and duct tape. The front bumper was a different color from the rest of the body. One of the tires was a Donut spare, worn perilously thin. Now, looking at her, he saw the same weary, patched-together quality in her. She was exhausted. The dark circles under her eyes weren't from a single sleepless night, they were etched there by months, maybe years, of them. "You were rushing," Arthur stated. It wasn't a question. She nodded, her eyes welling up with tears she was fighting desperately to hold back. "Yes. I'm so sorry. I was on my way to my third job. I work at the hospital, and then I clean offices downtown, and tonight I was going to clean a warehouse. Just for some extra cash. My mom. She's sick." The story spilled out of her, a torrent of quiet desperation. Her mother needed a heart valve replacement. The insurance from her hospital job wouldn't cover the full cost of the specialist. The waiting list for the public option was over a year long, and her mother didn't have a year. So Sarah worked. She worked until her bones ached and her vision blurred. She took every shift, every side job, every opportunity to scrape together a few more dollars. She was living in a cramped apartment in a bad neighborhood, paying exorbitant rent to a landlord who refused to fix the leaking ceiling or the faulty wiring. She was trapped. And now, this stupid mistake. Crashing into a car that was probably worth more than she would make in a decade. She saw it as the final straw, the one that would break her completely. Arthur listened. He didn't interrupt. He simply absorbed the information, his face a granite mask. Inside, however, a storm was brewing. He wasn't thinking about the dent in his car. He wasn't thinking about the inconvenience. He was thinking about his own mother, a woman who had worked her fingers to the bone in a sweatshop to put food on the table for him and his sister. He remembered the smell of industrial cleaner on her clothes and the permanent exhaustion in her eyes, the same exhaustion he now saw in Sarah's. He was thinking about his wife, Elena. He was thinking about his daughter, Sophia. They had been taken from him in a car crash, too. But theirs was no accident. It was a message from a rival, a man who did not believe in rules. A man Arthur had later erased from existence so completely that even his memory was afraid to linger. That day, Arthur had learned the ultimate failure of the system. The law could not protect his family. Justice was a fantasy sold to the powerless. The only real protection, the only real justice, was the one you made for yourself. He looked at Sarah and Lily, and he didn't see a stranger who had damaged his property. He saw a reflection. A chance to rewrite a single line in a history he could never change. The internal debate was brief. His code was strict, but it was his. He could bend it. He could amend it. Rule 4, he thought, forming it in that moment. When the system fails the innocent, you become the system. He made his decision. He gestured to the empty side of the booth. "Sit," he said. It was not a request. Sarah hesitated, confused. "Please. Sit down." She slid into the booth, pulling Lily onto her lap. The little girl looked at the fancy table, the starched white linen, the heavy silver, with a sense of wonder. Arthur signaled to a waiter, who had been hovering nervously nearby. "Bring a glass of milk for the child. And a slice of the chocolate cake." The waiter scurried away, relieved to have a task. Arthur then turned his gaze back to Sarah. "The car is not important," he said, his tone final. "It's a piece of metal. It can be fixed." Sarah stared at him, bewildered. "But the damage. It must cost a fortune." "It is of no consequence," Arthur repeated. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick, leather-bound wallet. He did not pull out money. Instead, he took out a pen and a small notebook. He wrote something down. "Your mother," he said, not looking up. "What is her name? And what hospital is she in?" "Maria Sanchez," Sarah answered, her voice barely a whisper. "She's at St. Jude's." Arthur wrote it down. Then he wrote down another name. A doctor. The best cardiac surgeon in the state, a man who owed Arthur a significant favor. "And your landlord," he continued. "What is his name?" "Marcus Thorne," she said. "Why?" Arthur didn't answer. He just wrote the name down and drew a firm, dark line underneath it. He closed the notebook and put it away. The cake and milk arrived. Lily's eyes went wide. She looked at her mother for permission. Sarah, still in a state of shock, just nodded numbly. Arthur watched the little girl take her first bite of the rich, dark cake. A small smear of chocolate appeared on her cheek. For the first time that evening, Arthur's expression softened, the hard lines around his mouth easing almost imperceptibly. He turned to Leo, who had been standing by, watching his boss with a mixture of confusion and unwavering obedience. "Leo," Arthur said, his voice back to its commanding tone. "Take Miss Jensen and her daughter home." He paused, then added, "Use the backup car." "Have her car," he gestured vaguely toward the street, "towed." "Not to a scrap yard. To the furnace." He didn't want her to ever have to drive that death trap again. "Then, come back here. We have 2 calls to make." He then looked at Sarah. "Go home. Get some rest. Don't worry about the car. Don't worry about your mother's surgery. And don't worry about your rent." He stood up, a towering, imposing figure. He looked down at Julian, who seemed to have shrunk in his seat. "Our business is concluded for tonight," Arthur said. "I trust you now understand the principles of pressure." With that, he turned and walked toward the back of the restaurant, disappearing through a private exit without a second glance. Sarah was left sitting in the booth, with her stunned daughter happily eating a piece of cake that cost more than their dinner for 2 nights, trying to understand what had just happened. She had crashed into a monster's car. And the monster had just offered her salvation. Later that night, Arthur sat in his office. It was a stark, modern space, all glass and steel, overlooking the glittering, indifferent city. Leo stood before his desk. "She's home," Leo reported. "The car has been taken care of. I ran a preliminary check on the landlord, Marcus Thorne. He owns 6 low-income properties. Dozens of complaints filed with the city. Code violations, illegal evictions. He's a bottom feeder. Has some minor connections to the O'Malley crew." Arthur nodded slowly. The O'Malleys were small-time irritants. Amateurs who dealt in petty crime and intimidation. They lacked vision. They lacked a code. "The doctor," Arthur said, changing the subject. "Call him. Dr. Alistair Finch. Tell him I am cashing in my marker. I have a patient for him. Maria Sanchez. I want her moved to a private room at his clinic by morning. She is to get the best care. The surgery is to be scheduled immediately. The cost," Arthur looked out the window, "is to be sent to me. It is not a concern." "Understood," Leo said. "And what about the car for the girl?" "Something safe," Arthur said. "A Volvo. Last year's model. Nothing too flashy, but new. Reliable. Have it registered in her name and delivered tomorrow morning. Full tank of gas, and put a new car seat in the back for the child." Leo made notes. He had followed Arthur for 20 years, seen him order acts of incredible violence and calculated generosity. But this was different. This felt personal. He knew about Elena and Sophia. He was one of the few who did. He understood. "And Thorne?" Leo asked, his voice dropping slightly. This was the part of the business he knew best. Arthur turned away from the window, his face set like stone. "Mr. Thorne preys on the weak. He preys on desperate mothers. This is an offense to me. It is an offense to our way of doing things." He paused, the silence in the office growing heavy. "We will pay him a visit," Arthur said finally. Tomorrow night. I want to have a conversation with him about his business practices. I want him to understand the concept of honorable enterprise. There was a chilling finality in his tone. Leo knew what that meant. It would not be a negotiation. It would be a lecture. And for Marcus Thorne, it would be the final lesson he ever received. The plan was simple, as all of Arthur's plans were. There was no need for complexity when you had overwhelming force. But the force Arthur intended to use was not one of numbers or weapons. It was the force of his presence. His reputation. The next evening, 2 black sedans slid to a quiet stop on a tree-lined street in a wealthy suburb. The houses here were large, with manicured lawns and bright, welcoming lights. It was a world away from the crumbling tenement where Sarah Jensen was trying to put her daughter to sleep. Marcus Thorne's house was the largest on the block, a gaudy monument to bad taste and ill-gotten gains. Arthur and Leo got out of the first car. For other men, dressed in dark suits, emerged from the second, their movements fluid and professional. They did not draw weapons. They wouldn't need to. They fanned out, securing the perimeter of the property with practiced, silent efficiency. One cut the phone line. Another disabled the security cameras. It took less than 30 seconds. Arthur walked up the stone pathway to the front door, Leo a half-step behind him. He didn't knock. Leo produced a small, metallic tool and, with a few deft movements, opened the lock. The click was barely audible. They entered the house. The inside was as tasteless as the outside. Gilt furniture, marble floors, and art that screamed of price rather than beauty. From deeper within the house, they could hear the sound of a television, loud and obnoxious. They found Marcus Thorne in his media room, lounging on a white leather recliner, a half-eaten bowl of popcorn in his lap. He was a fleshy, middle-aged man with a comb-over and a smug expression. The expression vanished when he saw the 2 men standing in his doorway. Fear replaced it instantly. A primal, animal fear. He knew he was not looking at police officers. He knew he was not looking at burglars. He was looking at something far worse. "Who are you?" he squeaked, trying to push himself out of the recliner. "What do you want?" Arthur walked into the room, his footsteps echoing on the marble. He picked up the remote and turned off the television. The sudden silence was deafening. "My name is Arthur Valentino," he said calmly. The name hung in the air. Thorne's face went from pale to ashen. He had heard the name. Everyone in the city's undercurrents had heard the name. The architect. A ghost. A legend. A man you prayed you would never, ever meet. I don't know you," Thorne stammered, his body trembling. "I have no business with you." "That is where you are mistaken, Mr. Thorne," Arthur said, his eyes cold and hard as diamonds. "You do have business with me now. Because you have business with a young woman named Sarah Jensen." Thorne's mind raced, trying to place the name among his hundreds of tenants. Then it clicked. The single mother in 3B. The one he was about to evict for being late with the rent again. "Her," he said, a note of disbelief in his voice. "What about her?" "She's a nobody. She owes me money." Arthur took another step closer. He seemed to suck the very air out of the room. "She is a mother trying to keep a roof over her child's head," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "She is a daughter trying to save her mother's life. She works 3 jobs. She pays her rent, even though you have illegally increased it by 40% in the last year. She lives with a leaking roof that you refuse to fix and wiring that sparks when it rains." Arthur paused, letting the words sink in. "You, Mr. Thorne, are what is wrong with this city. You are a parasite. You feed on the desperation of good people. You lack honor." Thorne was sweating profusely now, his eyes darting toward the phone on the end table, then to the door. He knew there was no escape. "I don't know what you're talking about," he blustered, his voice weak. "My business is legal." Leo stepped forward and placed a briefcase on the coffee table. He opened it. Inside was a stack of papers. This, Leo said, tapping the top sheet, is a title transfer document for the building at 1424 Elm Street. And the 5 other properties you own. You are going to sign them over to a holding company of our choosing. Thorne stared at him, aghast. That's insane. I'm not signing anything. Arthur slowly reached into his jacket. Thorne flinched, expecting a weapon. Instead, Arthur pulled out a photograph. He tossed it onto Thorne's lap. It was a picture of Thorne's own 2 children, a boy and a girl, getting off a school bus that afternoon. They were smiling, laughing. Innocent. They are beautiful children, Mr. Thorne, Arthur said softly. It would be a tragedy if their father's poor business decisions forced them to learn about the ugliness of the world too soon. The threat was unspoken, but it was as clear as a blade to the throat. Thorne stared at the picture of his children, and then at the face of the man who held their safety in his hands. The fight went out of him completely. He slumped in his chair, defeated. "What do you want?" he whispered. "You will sign the papers," Arthur said. "The buildings will be managed by my people now. The rents will be fair. The repairs will be made. You will also write a check, forgiving all of Sarah Jensen's supposed back rent." He leaned in closer, his voice barely audible. "And then, you will pack your bags. You and your family will leave this city. You will not return. Your business here is concluded. Permanently." Leo produced a pen and placed it in Thorne's trembling hand. Thorne looked at the papers, at the pen, at the photograph of his children. He signed. His signature was a ragged, desperate scrawl. When he was done, Arthur took the papers and the photograph. He turned to leave. At the doorway, he stopped and looked back at the broken man in the recliner. "There are rules," Arthur said. "Even for men like me. You would do well to remember that. If you are lucky enough to get a second chance to be a man at all." They left as quietly as they had arrived. Marcus Thorne was left alone in the silence of his gaudy, empty house, the smell of fear his only companion. The threat was permanently closed. He and his family were gone by sunrise. The next morning, Sarah was woken by a knock at her door. She opened it to find the stern, silent man from the restaurant, Leo. He was holding a set of car keys. "Good morning, Miss Jensen," he said politely. "This is for you." He handed her the keys. She looked at them, then back at him in confusion. "What is this?" "Your new car," he said. "It's parked downstairs. A gift from Mr. Valentino." She followed him outside, and there it was. A gleaming, dark grey Volvo sedan. It was beautiful. Safe. Impossible. She opened the back door and saw a brand new car seat, already installed. Tears welled in her eyes. I can't accept this," she stammered. "This is too much." "Mr. Valentino insists," Leo said. He then handed her a thick envelope. "This is also for you." She opened it. Inside was a new lease agreement for her apartment. The landlord was listed as a property management company she had never heard of. She scanned the document, her eyes landing on the monthly rent. $1. "This can't be real," she whispered, her head spinning. "And one more thing," Leo said, his professional demeanor softening for just a moment. "Your mother's surgery was this morning. Dr. Finch performed it himself. It was a complete success. She's in recovery now, in a private room. The bill has been handled." That was when Sarah finally broke. The tears she had been holding back for months, for years, finally came. She sat on the steps of her building and sobbed. Not from fear or desperation, but from a profound, overwhelming sense of relief. It was as if a mountain had been lifted from her shoulders. Leo stood by awkwardly for a moment, then cleared his throat. "Mr. Valentino said the debt is paid," he said, repeating his boss's words. Sarah looked up at him, her face streaked with tears. "But I don't understand. Why? Why would he do all of this for me? I'm a stranger." I crashed into his car. She fumbled in her pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled handful of bills. Maybe $60. Her grocery money for the week. She tried to press it into his hand. Please, take this. It's all I have, but he has to take something. Leo gently pushed her hand away. He said you already gave him something, Leo explained. Something worth more than money. He didn't know what it was, but he trusted that his boss did. A week later, Sarah found him. It took some doing, some brave questions asked of the right people, but she found the address of his office. She went there, holding Lily's hand. She was terrified, but she had to do it. She was led into the same stark, imposing office she had seen in her mind's eye. Arthur Valentino was standing by the window, looking out at the city. He turned as she entered. "Miss Jensen," he said. His voice was not unkind. "I am glad to see you. I trust everything is in order." "Yes," she said, finding her voice. "My mother. She's getting stronger every day. The car is wonderful. The apartment. I don't even have words." She stepped forward and placed a piece of paper on his vast, empty desk. "Lily drew this for you," she said. Arthur picked it up. It was a child's drawing, done in bright, cheerful crayons. It depicted a very large, imposing stick figure with dark hair, standing next to a smaller stick figure and a tiny one. The big figure had its arms outstretched, as if protecting the other two. Overhead, a smiling sun shone down. He looked at the drawing for a long time. "She wanted to thank the man who fixed everything," Sarah said softly. She looked at him then, her gaze direct and unflinching. "I have to ask," she said. "People say things about you. They say you're a dangerous man. Are you a good man or a bad man?" The question hung in the air between them. Arthur placed the drawing down carefully on his desk. He thought of the things he had built and the things he had destroyed. He thought of the lives he had saved and the lives he had ended. He was a contradiction. A monster with a code. A killer with a soft spot for children. "I am what I need to be," he answered finally, his voice heavy with the weight of his life. "For people who deserve it, I try to be the right man." It was the most honest answer he could give. He walked over to his desk and took out a simple, elegant business card. It had no name, no title. Just a single phone number. He handed it to her. "If you, or Lily, or your mother ever need anything again, you call this number," he said. "Anything at all. You will always be taken care of. You are under my protection now." It was a promise. And Arthur Valentino always kept his promises. 5 years passed. The city moved on, its heart beating to the same rhythm of struggle and ambition. For Sarah Jensen, however, the rhythm had changed. The frantic, desperate tempo of survival had slowed to a steady, confident beat of a life being built, not just endured. With the crushing weight of her mother's medical bills and her housing insecurity lifted, she had been able to breathe. She had enrolled in night classes at the community college, pursuing the nursing degree she had abandoned years earlier. She had excelled. The same hands that had once scrubbed floors for extra cash now administered medicine with a gentle, practiced confidence. She now worked as a registered nurse on the cardiac floor of St. Jude's, the very hospital where her mother's life had been saved. She had a career, not just a job. She had respect. Her mother, Maria, was healthy and vibrant. The surgery had given her a new lease on life. She lived with Sarah and Lily in a small, sunny 2-bedroom apartment in a much better neighborhood, the $1 rent from their old place having been transferred by the silent, efficient property company. Maria spent her days tending to a small garden on their balcony and looking after Lily when Sarah was on long shifts. And Lily? Lily was 10 now, a bright, happy girl with her mother's kind eyes and a spirit untouched by the desperation that had shadowed her early years. She was thriving in school, loved to read, and still drew pictures with a fierce, joyful intensity. They were a family, whole and safe. Sometimes, late at night after a long shift, Sarah would take out the simple business card with the single phone number. She had never used it. She never had to. But she kept it as a reminder. A talisman. Proof that in the darkest moment of her life, a strange, impossible kindness had found her. She never knew what happened to her old landlord, Marcus Thorne. She only knew that one day he was there, a menacing cloud on her horizon, and the next he was gone. The building had been transformed. Repairs were made, security was improved, and the families who lived there were treated with a dignity they had never known. She never saw Arthur Valentino again. He had receded back into the world of shadows and whispers from which he had emerged. But his presence remained, a silent, unseen guardian. Across the city, in the sterile, glass and steel office high above the streets, Arthur Valentino stood looking out his window. He was older now. More grey at his temples, the lines on his face carved a little deeper. His empire was larger, his power more absolute. But his office was not entirely a monument to his cold, calculated world. On the wall behind his massive desk, amidst the framed architectural blueprints of his legitimate businesses, there was one small, simple frame. It held a child's drawing, done in bright, cheerful crayons. A drawing of a big stick figure protecting a smaller one and a tiny one, under a smiling sun. Leo, himself now graying, still stood by his boss. He had seen Arthur stare at that picture countless times over the years. He would see him pause in the middle of a ruthless business decision, his eyes drifting to the drawing, and his expression would soften for just a fraction of a second. It was a touchstone. A reminder of a debt that was paid not with money or fear, but with something far more valuable. It was a reminder of a night when he hadn't been the architect, the crime lord, the feared patriarch. He had simply been the right man, at the right moment. True strength, he had come to understand, was not just the power to break things, but the power to mend them. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to protect those who felt it most. In a life defined by darkness, the light of one small, good deed could cast a surprisingly long shadow, illuminating a path toward a kind of redemption he never knew he was seeking. For in the end, it is not the empires we build but the lives we touch that become our truest legacy. A man is not measured by the fear he commands, but by the safety he provides to the vulnerable, proving that even in the heart of a monster, a hero can sometimes be found, waiting for the right moment to fix what is broken.